All right, so in today's video, we're gonna compare the Mavic Air 2 camera to the Autel EVO 2 in a brief comparison. I think these two cameras are more similar than they are different. They both share that same quad Bayer sensor, and they both sport that 48 megapixels. But the EVO has one trick that the Mavic Air 2 doesn't have, which is its ability to shoot in 8K. Now for this entire video, I chose not to shoot in 8K and to keep everything 4K because I think that's what the vast majority of users are going to do. Let's get started. What's good, everybody? Welcome back. Ken here. You're watching Original Dobo, and this channel is totally dedicated to drone and tech, so if that's your thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you leave this video. Okay, so Mavic Air 2, it's a new kid on the block. The EVO 2 Pro and the EVO 2 8K have been on the market now for a little over a month now, but not totally in everybody's hands. I think there's more Mavic Airs in people's hands than there are Autel EVOs. With that being said, I was really curious about the 8K version simply because this thing is like $14.97. And this guy you can get without a fly more for $7.99. So there's a very, very stark difference as far as pricing goes. So I want to know, how much better is the 8K than the Air for the price? So I did some head-to-head comparisons, but it's one thing to know first before we get started is that both of these have a quad Bayer sensor. And you may be asking yourself, what the hell does quad Bayer mean? I'm new to drones, I'm new to cameras, none of that means anything to me, it's Greek. Well, here's one thing you can know about quad Bayer. What it does is it basically takes like pixels and combines them into something they call pixel binning. I'm not gonna get specifically into what pixel binning is, but basically it creates larger pixels and it's more of I guess a parlor trick than it is actual physical hardware. Phones have this style of camera sensor and it's made its way into drones now. I don't really know of any cameras that we shoot on like DSLRs that have pixel binning quite like this, but it's a trick to get more out of your sensor. You can think of it like this. It's almost like overclocking your processor. You know, it's rated for 3.8 gigahertz, but you can overclock it to, let's say, 4.1. It's sort of something like that if I had to compare it to computer terms. But just know they both share the same exact sensor. There's nothing different in the two other than the color profile and the color science that each of these manufacturers have chosen will definitely shine here in this test. Now, as the test starts, I didn't label the first clips. I want you to see if you can tell which is which, and then I will do a reveal towards the end. I did take some photos. I took 2 photos and I also cropped in on those photos so you can sort of see the clarity as you use that 48 megapixel. Let's get the sample clips rolling. Alrighty, so in watching back on those clips, you know, these two really traded blows. As I was watching back to see which one I like more, I was having a hard time really deciding. So that first opening clip that we saw, I felt like the Mavic Air had a little bit better dynamic range. But then we flip over to that top-down shot, I felt like the details were still better in the Mavic Air. It did a better job running the exposure. Now for all of these tests, I used auto, 4K 60, and then for HDR, I used 4K 24, because when you utilize HDR, it doesn't let you choose any frame rate higher than 30 frames per second. And you guys already know how I feel about 30 frames per second, so we won't go into that here. So I felt like for the first couple of clips, the Mavic Air really had the better images right out of the gate. When we got closer to the tower, I felt like the EVO 2 did a better job with the exposure, and I had more detail and more contrast in the image. Something that I'm noticing with the EVO 2 is that there's a bit of a magenta shift to the images. I don't know why that is, but it has more of a magenta shift. Now that changes once we shoot in the log profiles. Now the Mavic Air 2 does not have log. It has decine-alike, but that's really not a bad thing in my eyes anyways, because this was really super easy for me to color grade. Now Autel did put out a log correction LUT basically based off of Sony S-Log, and I really wasn't happy with the results. It was too cool and there was a color cast on the tower. So I ended up color grading it myself manually and building my own LUT, which I think did far better than the correction LUT that Autel provided. So I don't know why that is, but I wasn't really happy with the LUT straight out of the gate downloaded from Autel. So they based it on S-Log. I'm not really a huge fan of that. So I'd have to give the nod to the Mavic Air 2 in that regard, just because decine-alike gives you a good amount of dynamic range, good flexibility, and it's super easy, especially for a beginner if they want to color grade. As far as the photos go, again, super amounts of detail in both images. You're not going to be displeased with either one of them. But again, if you notice looking at the EVO's image, there again is that magenta shift, and it's most noticeable in the sky. You can see that it just has the slightest tint of pink to it. And again, I don't know why. The Mavic Air 2 is not without fault, because the photos just have a very HDR-like vibe, and they're just too sharp, almost digitally sharp for some reason. Not really 100% sure as to why that is. I did do one last test utilizing HDR, and I felt that the EVO 2's HDR is a little bit more pleasing than the Mavic Air 2. I felt like the Mavic Air 2 just makes the sky look overly blue, like almost fake, but the EVO did a great job with retaining highlights in the shadows and the highlights. So I think the details just look better and much more natural. And if you wanted a straight off the SD card image, the EVO HDR definitely was better. Unfortunately on the EVO 2, 8K and the Pro, there are no HLG profiles, which is hybrid log gamma. The closest that you're gonna get is this HDR, which it locks you to automatic. And again, for all these tests, I did shoot in automatic. You know, it really boils down to brand loyalty, I guess, when it's all said and done. I mean, if we want to briefly touch on some of the key characteristics here of these two, the difference is you're getting 40 minutes of flight time when you're moving, and you're getting 34 minutes of flight time with this. Does that mean you should spend almost $500 more? Actually, I'm sorry, $600 more for this? For flight time, it's a 6-minute difference. I'm gonna say no. Now, as far as obstacle avoidance goes, that's definitely a big deal, because you have two top, and then you also have the side obstacle avoidance on the EVO, as to where on the Mavic Air 2, you have front and rear and the downward vision sensors, and that's it. But I think for most pilots, you probably never used the sideways, or I should say the side obstacle avoidance on the Mavic 2 Pro if you had that, because the only time it was active is when it's in tripod mode. So I really don't see that as a massive negative. Geofencing is another ordeal. If we want to touch on that briefly, this is completely unlocked to fly anywhere with responsibility. So with great power comes great responsibility, so you have to be aware of that. As to where this is going to ask you for your identity, it will allow you to unlock, but it will restrict your height to a responsible altitude in certain airspaces. So, you know, there's pros and cons to each of those. You can upgrade the camera on this, as to where no, you can't upgrade the camera. So those are some things to think about. I think there's a great value in the purchasing the Fly More kit versus the EVO 2. You could buy the rugged bundle, but you're gonna spend almost $1,700 by the time it's all said and done. People always ask me about the 10-bit profile. I don't believe there's 10-bit on the EVO 2 8K. I believe that is only a 6K thing, and the same goes for this. There's no 10-bit profiles, but again, you're probably not going to color grade anywhere near to that. As far as the range goes, I would say the range for both of these are pretty similar, although I will give the slight advantage to the Mavic Air 2 because it does have better reception. I find myself constantly getting weak video signal on the Untitled EVO 2. I don't know why that is. I have the antennas placed in all different types of orientations, but I will constantly get weak video signal. A Raptor, 4Hawks Raptor would probably fix that, give you a bit better penetration on the controller. As far as speed goes, this thing is absolutely crazy fast. It feels very good. They just recently pushed out an update that also helped with the EXP on the sticks. It was definitely noticeable as I was flying and doing the orbits. You're gonna get way more flight modes with the Mavic Air 2 than you will with the Untitled EVO, but that's to be expected. This is just a better ecosystem, as to where they're still trying to figure things out on the EVO 2. So in the end, it's just gonna boil down to what you like more. Do you plan on upgrading the camera maybe at some point? Or are you just that casual flyer that wants to save space in their backpack? And if that's the case, then the Mavic Air 2 would be a good choice. Some cons to the Air 2 is that it does have a single IMU, single GPS unit. So, you know, the redundancy isn't quite there like with the EVO 2. Something that I did notice, and maybe I'm noticing it more because of the incident that happened, is that it does take a while for my Air, this is a brand new Air by the way, to lock on GPS. And it takes a lot longer for satellites to appear. It's about almost instant on the Untitled EVO. This thing has zero issues locking satellites. I have about 19 satellites at any given time on any of the EVOs, the EVO 2 Pro or the EVO 2 8K. This today, I was getting about 17 satellites at the location where I was at, but it initially took a little bit of time. I was under a pavilion and I had to move the drone out from under the pavilion for it to actually lock satellites, as to where the EVO 2 didn't have an issue whatsoever. So, you know, take that for what it is. But this is just a brief comparison. I want to give you my initial thoughts on these two because they are a lot more similar than people would actually believe. But there you go. Hopefully this helps you in some decision making. I would probably still say it's probably a lot easier to get a Mavic Air at this point because the EVOs, Untitled just has a really hard time shipping products, and it's just a repeat thing every time they do a drone release. So hopefully they get that rectified pretty soon because I know a lot of people want to get this in their hands. All right, there you go. I will have links in the description below for either one of these if you want to check them out from DroneWorks. I am pretty active on the DroneWorks page, so if you message me, I can at least help you out or answer questions if you are interested in either one. But there you go. As always, guys, stay original.